This is my review of famous neurodivergent autism advocate TikToker Paige Layle, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, and her book, But Everyone Feels This Way. How do I feel about the book? No, it's not good. Sorry. I know she's very beloved. I know she's done a lot of great work, but it's bad even for what I was expecting a TikToker book to be, and this is somebody who had read pretty much all the famous YouTuber books when they were coming out in the mid-2010s and gave a lot of leniency to those also. Because, for example, I thought Joey Graceffa's was badly written, and yet I still gave it a good review because his message, getting to know him, came through so well. So why is it not good? A consistent thing I wrote in my notes throughout the entire thing was disorganized. It is very disorganized. There's a lot of sequencing issues. She info dumps in very strange places. Stories come in with no context, so I don't really know why I'm even listening to the story. It's very hard to get through. I think a lot of it could have been saved if most of the first section was cut out. The book starts from when she's very young, like birth to present day. The book should have started when she was in middle school. So I don't know how many pages this is. This total audiobook was about 8 hours. So middle school started 2 hours in, so cutting out the first 2 hours of this audiobook, and I think it would have been much better. Yeah, it's really terrible. The book opens with her seeing a child psychiatrist. She's very, when she's very young, I don't know exactly how old, but she's very young. She's very sensitive, she's very emotional. A lot of kids are like that, but hers are very dialed up. That's another thing I really have an issue with. And actually, you could say it's an issue with a lot of these neurodivergent TikTok advocate people. They're like, signs of autism. The thing is, a lot of these signs are just normal kids' behavior. Now, I'm not discrediting saying they can be signs, but there has to be more context into why those behaviors in this certain person in this situation would indicate versus just any other average person. And with her, the signs she says were signs she was autistic as a very young girl. I don't discredit they were signs, but the problem is, again, she doesn't give context that differentiate how they manifest differently in her, indicating something else versus other people. Because otherwise, a lot of these, actually pretty much most of the stories she gives, childhood to school years, you could argue are just everyone's experience, and she doesn't contextualize enough to educate us about the autism aspect of it, which I think is a huge problem. There are times where she does give good contextualization and education, but it's just so randomly thrown in among so many other stories and tangents that they get very lost. I think her message gets very lost in not very good writing. I don't know if she had a ghostwriter. I don't think she did, because the audiobook wouldn't tell me. There wouldn't be like a dedication. If she did, she needed a much better one. If she didn't, she really needed the ghostwriter just to help organize her thoughts so much better. So it starts with she had very repetitive behavior. She wasn't very well organized. She had memories going all the way back to 2. And she kind of gives what were autistic thoughts, which I think were just 2-year-old thoughts, honestly. And it's not to discredit, she's not autistic and all, because I don't want to come off like I'm disrespecting or trying to discredit the neurodivergent community. Again, it's just her preaching doesn't land when it comes to applying it to her personal narrative, because the two are very disconnected as a problem. She was actually reading very well. She was memorizing books at a very young age. She was memorizing them audibly. Again, I can't say for sure if that's an autism sign. It could be, but again, she doesn't really link it into how. But I'll just go into all the things she says about herself and making it feedback. Well, she gives just a lot of random memories that have no context. What's interesting is, I think was an indicator of how her mind was different, is she would just come home from school crying for hours, or even preparing to go to school. She would cry for hours. And her fear of school, I think, is a very good example of something that, again, is an indicator that went unnoticed. Her parents thought it was strange. But again, she doesn't go much beyond that. She then, she's like, I cried for hours when I came home from school. I cried before I went to school. And that's kind of it. And I'm like, no, that's the kind of thing we need more information on, not the other quirky things you did as a toddler, which could or could not be sign. Another huge thing is she wrote a suicide note at age 8 and said she had increasing death thoughts. And that's a really shocking thing. But that's it. There was no lead up or build up to it, and she kind of gave a little bit of her parents' reaction, but not a whole lot. And I think, again, if we had more context of what was going on specifically at that time, not just that she hated school, it would have helped us so much more, I think, understand her. Some of the stories are good and some aren't, but all of them had too much mundane detail, and I think she was trying to give us the idea of what it was like to have like very anxious thoughts where you hyper-focus, which is very important and all. But again, I think she was focusing on the wrong details that convey what it's like to have anxious thoughts and be hyper-focused. And also, I don't think she really did a good job of like balancing of like anxious thoughts, regular Paige, anxious thoughts, regular Paige, distinguishing the two. Because if you kind of just read the book very quickly or breeze through it, you just think she was anxious all the time. She kind of was, but again, we need to know what is it about this that isn't normal compared to the others. There's just a lot of stories leading up till middle school that I think were just insignificant, just very normal childhood. The other thing of when she talks about school, her issues and struggles in school is, this is a problem. I understand she's trying to explain how she learns differently. She never understood things and lessons the same way other people, which I think is a very good thing to write about. The problem was she accidentally made neurotypical people seem dumb because she made neurotypical people, or anyone who doesn't have autism or whatever, she makes them out to think that like everyone neurotypical learns like a robot. This is what it says, like spoon feeding information. And because she wasn't able to learn that way, well, because she needed better explanations, more complicated explanations of things. But I'm like, I think she's really bad. I mean, that seems like an accident. I don't think she really believes that, but I think that was just a bit of an oversight in not very good writing. One thing I really liked actually about her writing about her autism and struggling in school is learning disability, is writing essays for English class. This is, I think, something that neurodivergent people really struggle with actually a lot in school, is writing an essay, making a concrete point, because they have so many thoughts they can't hone in on like a concrete take, you could say, interpretation, and struggle articulating interpretations, finding the right evidence to support their main thesis, because it seems like, so many thoughts, they just want to talk about everything and anything and all, so everything applies. I actually like that. I think she did a good job about that. And I think what was really good is she did a great job describing the struggling English class of like trying to get into the mind of the essayist or novelist of the characters, so she could then kind of be in their shoes and then understand what the writer was trying to do and then kind of react to that. I think she did a really good job talking about that. And then she also describes what it's like to have autistic shutdowns. She did that very well. That actually really gave me a good idea. What's interesting is, she didn't say this, but I wonder if this is like an autism thing. When her depression is really bad, her neurodivergence, or not her sensory issues seem to become worse. That's just something I noticed. I don't know if that's actually true. If it's not, maybe I got the impression due to the fact that if the book is just not well organized. She then goes into writing. At this point, I think she's roughly in middle school, close to the end of middle school at this time. And she talks about going to therapy, and see, she's in therapy a lot, and like, I wish we knew more what happened in these therapy sessions, what went wrong, what went right, but like, we don't get even a fraction of the conversations she had in therapy. Like, and I think that's such a key element left out, maybe to protect identity of her family. As a teenager, she has a lot of autistic meltdowns, but it's interesting because they masquerade as like just normal broody teen issues of being moody. I think this is going to be a really good way to talk about how autism kind of lies underneath and flies under the radar from these like very just typical teen moody stuff when she needed a lot more help, but she didn't really go into that. I liked actually her writing about her friends telling her how an interaction with her goes differently than she seems to think it goes. It didn't go the way she thought it did, and the disconnect, and I think we got more of that. More also about the discrepancies between like the lessons and what she was actually learning, and we don't get enough of that. There's also way too many typical high school drama stories like friends and dating that we did not need, autism related or not, we just didn't need them. Also, I do like how she describes how her life changed after her diagnosis. She stops masking, she can admit to when she's having autism related sensitivity problems. And her family has a hard time adjusting. Also, what I really liked is when she wrote about her thoughts and how to really get control of them and understand them, she has to like color code them. A color coding system, that was really awesome. That's something I didn't know. And I think we that kind of internal speculation, we need a lot more of that. Also, I think it's interesting how when she got a diagnosis, the school was her high school was trying to give her support but failed her, and she ended up being 5150'd. I kind of wish I got more into how they failed her, because they were trying to give her mental health counseling. Then again, it's a public high school, so what can you expect? And also, she talked about how, again, not getting along with her parents is just like a side thing. Her parents have always been very extroverted people and friendly, and she's more introverted, and how people expect her to be like her parents and how that really ruined her. When she's, well, I don't know if it's a 5150, I guess Canada's version of a 5150, whatever they call it in Canada, sorry. It's interesting, again, hyperfixation, but see, this is a very important story in her mental health journey, and it's kind of very choppy, and it doesn't really make sense with everything else. She's 5150'd around the time of when she's supposed to take Canada's equivalent of the SATs, a major exam. And she's hyper-fixated on she has to be released from the hospital because she needs to take it on this day and she needs to study, and she was getting very anxious about time, I think. And she would have chances to retake it. And I mean, the school would make accommodations because of being institutionalized. And I think that's very interesting. But she kind of just jumped to that story without really much build up into her mental health breaking down to the point of getting 5150. Like, what was the final blow? And then never really into what about her autism was making her so fixated on, like, you know, like, what was her logic to it has to be at this time? Because she was saying to the mental health team, I have to take the test at this time and I need to now. And they were like, no, you don't, you can do it later. So she never really said about like why she believed that at the time. Well, there's more high school drama. Don't really see the point in a lot of it, including that. So again, the book could have been shortened even more than I said before. She just drops in so many arguments she had with friends and family with no context or build up to it. And then really no kind of after resolution. It's just there randomly in a bunch of other stories that seem very normal for a teenager to have. I got the feel her parents kind of used her autism diagnosis as a scapegoat for explaining, I think, their coldness. I think her parents were kind of very cold in a lot of ways. Crams story after story about just other things that I don't see are important, and she doesn't explain why it's autism related or not, or how the autism was influencing that or anything. Again, so many stories, there's just no rhyme or reason and so many tangents, and they're just really don't seem related. If there is some relation, she didn't specify it enough. Yeah, I just kind of felt like the end of the book just was like, again, just blah, 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 blah. She goes to university, her mental health declines, she actually ends up dropping out. It's funny that she's a TikToker who can buy a house, and yet she only just has a high school education and works part as a lasher, installing lashes. Like, isn't that what a weird world we live in? What a weird world. Okay, so, and that's about it. That's kind of where it ends. There's my review of Paige Layle's book, part 2. Overall, well, be interested to know other people's thoughts.